Today on the Videomaker podcast, Chris and I talked to Raymond Hatfield, who's the host of the Beginner Photography podcast. And it's another photographer, but actually Raymond has a background in cinematography and went to film school. So we had a great conversation about a number of beginner photography tips that are also highly relevant to filmmaking and video. So we talk about equipment and how to focus on, which camera to get essentially, and how you can improve your composition, and also how much you should pay attention to post-production and post-processing. So a lot of takeaways there, whether you're interested in photography or video. So hope you learn a lot. As always, if you've been listening to the podcast and you enjoy it, we would love it if you went to iTunes and gave us a review and hit the subscribe button, or do the same thing on other apps if you use other apps. But this kind of stuff is really, really important for helping out podcasts like ours. We would be really thankful if you did that. So with that out of the way, let's get on with the show.
When was the last time you were stuck in post-production, needing visual effects services like rotoscoping, match moving, or compositing? Or how about green screen editing, beauty retouching, and color grading? With quality visual effects and sound design, there is no such thing as too good to be true. Fiverr is home to thousands of sellers who offer services that can transform any visual from ordinary to captivating and engaging. Okay, so your production may look good, but what's the point if it doesn't sound good? Sound designers can create and edit your needed sound effects to add a whole new level of experience. From audio engineers to Foley artists that make sure you get the exact sound you want. Fiverr has all that you need for your post-production. Let Fiverr bridge the gap between your imagination and your final production.
Welcome to the Videomaker podcast. I'm Mike Wilhelm, and with me, as always, across the table is Chris Monlux.
Hello.
And today, special guest, host of the Beginner Photography podcast, Raymond Hatfield. Raymond, how's it going?
I'm doing pretty good, guys. How are you?
Good. So, Raymond, I was excited to hear, actually, it must have been 45 seconds ago or so, that that you, while you do host a photography podcast, you actually have a background in cinematography. So maybe you could just give us the high-level overview of how did you get started in image making, what led you to cinematography, and then over to photography?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and it's surprisingly quick as well, which is even better. When I was in, elementary school and whatnot, which would have been, early 90s, my parents had it was a camcorder, one of these big old high 8 camcorders. It wasn't, it wasn't so old that it was still shooting like full size VHS or anything like that, but it was small enough to where as a kid, I could hold it and I wanted to keep playing with it. But my stepdad was like, no, it's too expensive. You can't play with it, can't do anything. Well, my buddy who lived across the street, we would always, it's what kids do. We'd play with Legos. We'd, go run around in the woods, the forest, over by our house and stuff. And we would just naturally kind of come up with these stories. And at some point I wanted to film those. I wanted to do these things. But again, I had that block of my stepdad who was like, no, can't touch it. Well, eventually I got old enough to where I was mowing enough lawns. I thought to myself, I'm going to buy my own camcorder. And it was this a Canon. I don't know what the model was, but I still remember going to Best Buy to buy this thing.
Oh, yeah.
And I just fell in love. I shot everything that I could with as many DV tapes as I could afford at the time. And so that must have been the end of middle school. And then shortly after that, after middle school, I went into high school. I've always been bad with words, always, had no interest in reading things, anything like that. So when it came time to being in English class and having to create book reports, anything of the sort, I was terrible. Even if I could read a story, understand it, I was terrible at kind of re-summarizing the whole thing into words. But luckily, I had a really awesome English teacher, Mr. Smith, who I don't even remember what it was, honestly. I made some video for something. I don't remember what it was or anything, but he had seen it. And he told me, hey, if making a video is going to be easier for you than writing an essay, that you continue to fail every time that, you got to make one, then yeah, go ahead and do that. So that's what I did. I started making videos with my friends. And as you can imagine, all of my friends wanted to be in these videos because that means that they didn't have to, write any of these essays either.
Nice.
And I think it was at that point, at that time, when you're in high school and you're the only one who's really interested in video, you're coming up with a concept, you're writing, what it is that you got to make, you have to shoot it, you got to edit it, you got to do the sound, you got to do you have to do everything. And I really enjoyed that aspect of creating something with this camera that I had in high school, right? I was in full creative control. And I told myself, like, I love this, I want to do this forever. So right after high school, I went to film school. And while I loved the experience, as you guys know, like once it becomes like a job, once you have an official position, you have less creative control of how the entire project turns out. And there's more people who have their say in how something goes or are trying to, push a new product or whatever it is. And it suddenly wasn't as interesting to me. And at the same time that I had graduated film school it was the end of 2008. So it was like writer strike and actor strike at the same time. And I was living in LA, no work to be had anywhere. So I followed a buddy of mine to a wedding because luckily most of the technicals transfers, over from video to photos. And I had a great time because once again, I was in full creative control. And I had kind of just continued to pursue that with the idea of, well, one day the video industry will get better. And then I met my wife around the same time, and we had decided that we did not want to continue to live in LA or raise kids there. So we moved out, and I've been pursuing photography ever since, really. So that's how I got here.
So it sounds like, well, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe part of the push towards photography was leaving LA then, or maybe another way to say that is moving to a place where there just wasn't as much video work, or was it something else?
Well, no. So the intention, to tell you the truth, was my wife was from Indianapolis. So she was born and raised in Indianapolis. I was born and raised in Northern California. So we had decided to move out here because I had thought Indianapolis is really close to Chicago, and there's going to be tons of film work in Chicago. I think at the time they were filming Lincoln in Chicago, and I thought, I could probably get on that. I had lots of camera assisting jobs. But then once I moved out here, and realized, actually I don't want to drive 5 hours a day or 4 hours a day to Chicago. I needed still something to fulfill myself creatively, and photography was just that. And then it kind of just got to the point to where it took over my life, and the more photography I was doing, the less video work I was doing. So it wasn't so much I'm choosing to do photography and leave video behind. I'm still actually shooting video just, in January. So before kind of where we're at globally right now, I was actually shooting a film in San Antonio. So I'm still kind of in that, but the majority of my work is definitely photography.
It's interesting when you look at, like, especially in the United States, we have our hubs of film, right? We have our New York, our LA, and the big cities for that part. But finding the video work, there's less work in the small towns, but photography, or especially event photography, I would say the demand is just as high anywhere you go. I guess as long as there's enough people to do business to keep going. But there's a wedding every weekend. No matter what city you go in, there's a lot. There's always needing family portraits and those kinds of things. Those bread and butter photography jobs that tend to be just about anywhere. Whereas the video jobs are they are a different scale. Like I think, like you were saying, like losing that control a lot of times has to do with the scale of film projects, right? Is like even as a DP, I'm choosing how the framing and everything goes here, but there's other people making choices or whatever you're doing. I think that the bigger the crew, and I feel the same way, like the bigger the crew, the less I feel like I'm the creativity part of it is being fulfilled. Like I'm not getting my the things I like to do videography for is the creative side of it. I like to be fulfilled there. I like to do it with my work because otherwise I'm going to be trying to fill all my personal time with that. But that it's definitely the larger teams are harder to find that single ownership, I guess, or what would you say the biggest? I would say like 5 or more. Once you start getting everybody has their own special job, I think that, a director is going to have a bigger creative vision, obviously, but maybe not, the DP or the head lead gaffer or whatever.
I think probably what it comes down to is how many financial stakeholders are there?
Yeah.
Right. Like the more people who the film impacts financially, the more people who have an opinion on what should happen. Right. So, I just looked up, you said, you moved to Indiana, close to Chicago, and they were shooting Lincoln at the time. So Lincoln's production budget was $65 million. I don't know how much the most expensive photography production budget is or was.
Nowhere close.
Yeah. But it's probably not $65 million, right? So, that money, the people who put up that money, have a big opinion about what should happen with this movie, and they're going to exert their opinion on the production. Now, this is a Steven Spielberg film, so the amount of pressure on him to do the bidding of his financial stakeholders is probably a little less than any normal director or what have you, but still, it's a lot of money on the line.
But he's Steven Spielberg. Like,
exactly.
I'm Raymond Hatfield. You know what I mean? So it's hard to throw as much weight around when you're not critically acclaimed or you don't have any Academy Awards or anything. But kind of going off what you were saying there, Chris, I always feel like it's once the production designer has an assistant, then like that's when the production is too big to where it's hard to fulfill yourself with all those creative decisions.
Totally.
Okay, so Raymond, you have this podcast, the Beginner Photography Podcast, and just sort of to put myself in the mindset of this conversation, I went online to look at beginner photography tips to see like what kind of crossover is there really here between people who are getting into photography and people who are getting into video. And actually, I came across this site top of Google. It was photographylife.com with a bunch of beginner photography tips, and I was just looking down this list and I thought, wow, you could just rename this beginner video tips and change nothing else about it, and it would be just as relevant. So maybe I was thinking what we could do is we could go through this list and just sort of talk about what does this mean from a photography standpoint and what does this mean from a video standpoint. And maybe our listeners can learn something along the way, people who are kind of just getting started. So the number one tip on here is use the camera you already have. I don't know how different this is for video or film, but what's your take on this general concept?
Well, Apple just with its iPhone 12 came out with that video with Emmanuel Lubetsky, who is now shooting these shorts with this iPhone 12, and says that the next great cinematographer is probably shooting right now on an iPhone, and this is just saying that like where we're at with technology right now, we do have all the tools at our disposal. So when it comes to photography and even videography, I know this is difficult because when you first get in, you have all these great creative ideas and you want to go out and you want to capture the world. You want to tell this story. And then you go out with your limited knowledge, but with this strong story, you come back, you view either the footage or the photos and you think, oh, this is garbage. Like this is nowhere near what I was expecting to be able to capture. What's the problem? And if you know in your head what the story is and you know how you want it to look and it doesn't look that way, for some reason, that's never your fault. It's always the camera's fault, right? That's where we default. So, oh, well, you know what? If I had that, red camera instead of this iPhone, I'd be able to create better footage it's the same with photography. But with photography, obviously, the cost to acquire a new camera is considerably lower. So oftentimes these new photographers will go out and just buy that flagship camera and surprise, surprise, they're taking the exact same photos. So when it comes to, the best camera is the one that you have with you, it's entirely true because it's dependent on your skill set, whereas somebody who is a great photographer, or, let's take the Roger Deakins example, okay? Because I don't think that we can have a video podcast and not talk about Roger Deakins for a moment. But like, he started off as a photographer, and still to this day, like, he's taking photos of his own, and he is of a much higher, caliber shooter. But essentially, he's just shooting with like a rangefinder camera with like a single lens, and that's it. He's not shooting with, top of the line Canon gear, Nikon gear, Sony gear, whatever it is. He's not in the spec war. He's just thinking, I'm just going to go out and capture something. And that's what he does. And that's what we can all do, because we're limited by what our skill set is. So the more that we learn, the better our skill set is. And maybe the more you can utilize that top end gear. But for now, if you're just getting started, I mean, you said it best, like just use what you got and just go from there. Capture what you can until you can't capture anymore. And then maybe think about upgrading to whatever's next.
Yeah, I read this tip as like, just get to doing it. If you want to do something, get to practicing it. Okay, you have a cell phone, cool. I mean, you have a story to tell. Try to tell that story, and the more you get practice at doing those things, the better your stories, the better your presentation. All those things you're shooting, all those things are going to get better with the more experience. So don't wait until you have that perfect piece of equipment. Use what you got. And I get a lot of, questions like, oh, I want to get a new camera, blah, blah, blah. And I go, okay, well, what of your last camera is holding you back? And almost never there's an answer. It's almost like, well, because I like that new feature on that newest camera or whatever. And I get it. I'm totally gear lust. I totally want to get that newest camera too. But a lot of times it's like, really, are you gaining that investment in the camera? On our last podcast, when Mike and I were together, we were talking about just like the idea of a stripped down production because of COVID and whatnot. And I brought up a new Billie Eilish music video, and she directs all of her music videos, which is great. And she's like the most popular musician, right now, and very, very, could have anyone making her music videos. And her latest one is all one shot. It's in a mall. And recently on her Instagram, she showed some behind the scenes, and it was one dude holding a cell phone, and it's one take. I mean, this is Billie Eilish. She got like 8 or 9 Grammys, some kind of crazy amount of Grammys. She could have
album of the year, artist of the year, whatever it is.
Totally. And she's having her music video because it was about getting out there and doing it. It's like, what's a set I can shoot at that has a lot of lighting? Oh, a mall, and no one will be there. And of course she'd get carte blanche on it anyway, but it's like, how simple is that? A one single shot on a cell phone, and I imagine she'll get 1 billion views on the video. You know what I mean? And like, it's just crazy. So it's like, do you really need those things? Now, given without her, who she is and all the other things, would that have mounted to the attention? No. But it's just one of those things where like, just get to doing it and get it out there, because you can learn from it and be working on the next project that's going to take you to that next level. I always find every project, hopefully I'm taking away something that I learned that I can apply to my next project, so that it can either be better, I can do it more efficiently, I can make more money doing it, whatever it is, that I'm applying something I learned from that last project, because that progression is really important to, I think, just a career in general. But like for me, it's like for motivation, like another video, you can see it that way, or another, whatever it is, another wedding, whatever you're shooting. Oh, it's another one of those things. Or it could be an opportunity for you to, go one more level, or learn something you didn't before, or try something you haven't tried before, or when you get good enough to take a leap of faith in trying to do something that might be more difficult than you think you can handle. That's when, like, I always think, if I could shoot it on my phone, or I could shoot it on a Red. I don't know if, would the product be any better? Yeah, probably. You get shallow depth of field or something. But what you just added is a huge amount of workflow that if you were at the level of the beginning, like, would you be able to deal with the workflow of a high-end camera? Probably not, And so It's like, baby bites will get you to get you there eventually. But you always want to get to that level. I want to make something like Spielberg today. And it's like, that just can't happen. One, he's got lots of experience, but two, there, the foundations are there. And so you got to get that foundation. I think that's use the camera or use the gear you already have. I think is that, like, get to using it, wear it out, use that gear until you are limited by its technical abilities to do the idea you have. And I think a lot of people, you're just going to jump into a new ability and then try to make something with it. I know I do. I mean, I'm challenged to do that most of the time when we're doing reviews. It's like, oh, this has got a new feature that's never been on anything else before. Test it. Test it on what?
Yeah.
Like
exactly.
what how am I going to get some information on this if it's this new technology? So it's, you gotta, sometimes that's the challenge, but that's kind of a backwards challenge that I have to make, is I have to deal with. This is pretty rare, but I think most, although it is very typical, I think, for a lot of shooters to have gotten their gear just before their big shoot because they're really excited about that big shoot or whatnot. So they're cutting their teeth while they're doing it too.
Well, that's common in photography as well, where so many people will rent a new camera before a wedding, and then after the wedding, oh my God, I botched the whole thing. I didn't know what I was doing. And, like you said, learn your gear, wear it out. I love it.
I think all of this is great advice, and I definitely agree that the camera is not as big of a factor, especially for beginners, than a lot of people think it does. And to your point, Raymond, you're definitely right that people often try to project their flaws onto their equipment, or just blame their equipment for whatever thing that they're dissatisfied about. At the same time, I think that maybe the spirit of this tip is that gear doesn't matter as much as you think it does. And I don't know if I would entirely agree with that, at least for video. So if we think of video and photography and the camera specifically, so the camera in a photography shoot is probably, I don't know enough about photography to say, but I'm going to say a third of the total gear that's involved once you consider lights and tripods and all that.
Right.
And in
Maybe
video,
yeah,
on a video shoot, it might be a fifth or a tenth,
Yeah.
in the sense that, we can think about the Billie Eilish video, and I haven't seen the behind the scenes of it, but I would imagine that maybe part of that setup was a stabilizer.
Nope.
Oh, okay. Well,
but it was heavily edited, and the edit was what made the video good. So whoever edited did a really amazing job at doing zoom ins and to the beat and all this kind of stuff. But it was all about the edit. But anyway,
yeah. So at any rate, but as an example here, if you're making a video, there's an equipment that you can invest in that makes a dramatic and an immediate improvement. And one example is a microphone, right? It's important to add this equipment element to improve the overall production quality.
Yeah.
And not even in production quality in the case of a microphone, but just the ability to effectively communicate.
Yeah.
But I definitely agree that the camera, because for video, it is kind of a small portion of the overall production once you count lights and microphones and stabilizers and drones and all this other stuff. Upgrading the camera is not going to make a big improvement in those cases.
Not unless you've perfected its ability. I think that my thought here is use what you got because it's what you got, right? And get good at it until you are limited by it. But I think that if you want shallow depth of field, your cell phone's going to be a really difficult tool to use for that purpose. There's going to be things, dialogue, if you want good dialogue, if you want those things to actually raise up. But I think in the way of learning and getting better, don't see it as a roadblock that you don't have the perfect equipment. Just get to doing it. And eventually either your need will allow you to get that new equipment, or the money you make from it, or just your desire and want to be into the thing enough that, okay, now it's worth investing in, not just coming out swinging. And I'm always surprised by our numbers that we have from our audience of the people that buy the most every year are enthusiasts. They have a bigger budget than the pros do on buying their equipment. And I kind of makes sense, because I know in my hobbies, I tend to want to oh, well, it's my hobby. Of course I want to enjoy every aspect of it. I don't want to be using my camera and be oh, I don't like this camera. I want to be inspired and using the thing. And then of course it sits in the corner and gathers dust and I don't actually use it. But but the dream is nice. And I think I think sometimes what drives the enthusiast space, at least.
Yeah. I think the thing you got to watch out for, if video or photography is your hobby, you got to watch out for the equipment itself being the source of your satisfaction. In the sense that, you could buy a new camera and be oh, and without acknowledging it, going, I guess I'm satisfied now, and now move on to another hobby. I've reached the pinnacle of this hobby by owning the most expensive camera, and now I can do something else. Okay, so maybe let's hit the next one, which actually it's a single line, this just a few words of this tip, but actually I think it takes a lifetime to master, which is focus on composition, which I don't know, it's a big deal for both of these things, but not exactly easy to implement right away, right?
When it comes to shooting video work, when it comes to shooting film, I always found that one of the things that I struggled with most was actually composition, because when it comes to photography, I can point my camera at something and that's going to be the frame. Whatever I put inside it is the frame. But when it comes to video, you got to deal with a whole lot more, whether it's, your talent moving around or the camera moving around. These are different things, and this is what you have to pay attention to. And wherever that camera lands, composition's got to be good. Wherever it starts, composition's got to be good. Wherever it lands, the composition has got to be good. And obviously, the role of composition is, it's not just like a thing. It's not just, we got to have a good composition, check the box. It's to engage your viewer more into whatever it is that they're watching, whether it be video or photography here, to get them more into that scene. And whether that be through framing the subjects, or whether that be to, highlight a certain aspect, to further the story, that's its job. So when it comes to composition, this is something that I honestly believe that you cannot teach to a masterful level. This is something that is so hard to be taught beyond the basics, rule of thirds, leading lines, framing, that it can only be learned through experience. And I think that that's one of the reasons why there's a lot of pushback on it, because people like that quick fix. People like, that's why people buy that, that brand new flagship camera. It's because they think that that's the quick fix. They don't buy it because, for any logical reason. They buy it because they think that it's going to make them better, without doing any additional work. And composition, that's just not the case. You have to continue to do it, and that's why it's so hard to teach. But that's also why it's so important. Like, that is where you're going to see how talented or how skilled a DP is, how talented or skilled a photographer is how they conduct their compositions and their framing in their images to ultimately tell a better story. I mean, if you look, sorry, I was gonna be done there, but if we at some of just the best cinematographers, obviously you could talk about Deakins all day long and how he does things a little bit different, but I think one of the best cinematographers when it comes to composition is actually Bradford Young, who for those who don't know, shot Arrival, Selma, Solo, the Han Solo movie with Ron Howard there. I was watching an interview with him, and he was talking I think the whole subject of the chat was actually about lighting and how he likes, minimal lighting, and actually thinks that, lighting on set kind of gets in the way of how things work. But when he was talking about composition and when they were showing images of his frames, it just really brought home the fact that, even though you don't have this, I don't want to say you don't have the budget, but even though you don't have all the extras with all the lights, even though you don't have all the extras, you can still make a very powerful frame with next to nothing. And I think that that's what he does a great job at, which really just pushes that story forward every time.
Totally. I think on the basic level of like composition, I remember when I was a little kid, closing one eye and like kind of framing something just because I wanted to see it that way. I didn't have any big motivation or anything, but I did, that never really stuck with me. It wasn't like I was like, oh, I went into film for this. But then I cut my teeth making TV commercials and local ads and whatnot. And so I was always going into new locations that I didn't have control over, that I might not have ever seen before, and then shoot something and try to make something look good. Now, given we're not going for artistic composition, but we still are trying to communicate with that. And that's when I was like, oh, I remember doing that, closing my eye, and I'm like, I'm scoping out the location and start noticing, oh, that looks kind of neat, that I can put someone in that space or over there. It's that same kind of introspection, or the kind of inspection, I guess, of what you're seeing to go, oh, what fits there. And I think what it ended up doing for me is that I started noticing when I'd come into a place, if there was some location that was really exceptional, you start noticing like, okay, over there for sure, I need to shoot. If you're just going, as far as not a huge plan of what you're doing, but applying that composition to like, especially like events or whatever you're doing that you don't have control over the framing that's actually there. Noticing the areas that have, leading lines and things, so you can play with those. And that's like that. And it is a play. It is I'm going to do this. Let me try this. And sometimes you just, oh, that's it. And you're going to be able to really identify why that area looks good to you or whatever. But that practice of trying to find good composition doesn't require a camera in your hand. You can be doing this, doing it while you're, bored at the DMV, while you're waiting for your food to get cooked, all the things. You can be practicing these things, because then when you get a camera, those practice, those tests that you're kind of giving yourself are going to be really easy to apply. And it ends up being something, well, like now I don't think too outwardly about it, but I do recall for a long time, like my idea, especially for commercials, we had 5 or 6 shots that we needed for 30 seconds. So it's like, okay, I'm on location. Where are these places I want these shots to be if I'm getting to choose where they are? And, applying those things that you just practiced doing. I mean, it's enough that I remember doing that while I was on a long drive with my family. Like, oh, this is kind of neat. If I turn my head this way, all the trees in a row start looking really neat. Okay, that's kind of cool. Oh, if I do it from a little bit different angle, the trees stay in frame a little bit longer. Oh, that's interesting. What would that be helpful for? And, doing those kinds of thought challenges to composition, especially, I think, are things that can really challenge your thought process for choosing the frame anyway. I think it's really interesting with photos. I think it's really great because, when you don't have to have control over the situation, you just need to get the moment when the background's not distracting or what have you. Whereas video, like, something moving in the background that you don't have control over, probably not the best thing to deal with in a scene or whatnot. But that I think, having that mind's eye of trying to go, okay, what's going to be distracting? What's going to help me? What's going to lead someone in? And then trying to identify those when you get to a space is a fun thought process.
I like, Raymond, this idea that you said that it doesn't take long really to learn the rule of thirds and leading lines and all the kind of sort of basic fundamentals of what composition is or is comprised of, no pun intended. But the fact that composition, at least in filmmaking, I imagine with photography, is a storytelling tool that utilizing those elements to actually communicate a story visually is the really, really difficult part that, like you said, just it takes a lifetime of effort to become quite good at it. I was just thinking of the Netflix show Queen's Gambit that's out right now, and how fantastic the cinematography is there, in that it does things to help tell the story by simply like placing things in certain shots in a certain like way. So, for example, the main character in the story is like a drug addict, or at least a drug abuser. And so, there's never, there are certainly scenes where it's quite overt, but the cinematography is constantly reinforcing this by sort of placing these visual elements in a way that your eye doesn't miss them, right? So they, for example, will put the pills in a portion of the screen lit a certain way so that you see the pills before you see her face, right? Because you always look at the screen from left to right, top to bottom. And so they'll strategically place it in a way that as you're scanning left to right, you catch the pills, then you move on to the main character. Or, motion draws a person's eye. So they'll make it basically a still frame so that you have a second to absorb the portion you're supposed to absorb, and then add the motion of the character to sort of bring you to whatever else is happening in that shot. And that's the kind of thing where it's really difficult to just like, hop online and watch a YouTube video about composition and pick all that stuff up. You can understand it academically, but in terms of applying it in a way that is effective, that actually works in telling a story is quite difficult, and people take their entire lives to figure it out.
Yeah, well, and I think that the masterful use of composition is the knowledge of what you're trying to achieve, right? So in the way of, I want to introduce the pills before I introduce the character so that you are already thinking about the pills when the character delivers their line. That's a setup for the story. But that application wouldn't be able to be had if you weren't trying to make that important. So if you weren't, if you hadn't decided that I want to have I think of a lot of Kubrick stuff of like, oddly center or through color, like that was not, I mean, obviously it had to be intentional. It probably took a lot of planning to make those things happen. But that if you know what you're trying to invoke from the viewer, that helps you apply those rudimentary tools of composition to help tell your story better. And then it's the skillful, masterful application of those rules, that are going to make something that much more impactful to the viewer.
Absolutely. Okay, maybe we'll take a quick pause there for break, and we'll be right back. Videomaker has been the go-to website for video production professionals and enthusiasts since 1986. There's a reason a quarter of our audience has been following us for more than 10 years. Simply put, our content makes our audience better at producing video. For whatever level you're at, we have the content to get the quality of work where you want it to be. Nobody knows this better than our Videomaker Plus members. With exclusive offers and access to courses, webinars, back issues, and the digital magazine, they're able to stay up on the top of their production game. So now we want our podcast listeners to get in on the exclusive access. For a limited time only, we're offering a $100 discount to our Professional Plus annual membership. That's 42% off the normal price. To claim this exclusive deal, go to videomaker.com/2020plus. That's videomaker.com/2020plus. PLUS, not the symbol. It only takes a minute to sign up, and you'll get immediate, unrestricted access to all of our content. Don't wait. This offer will not be around for long, and you just can't ignore the benefits. That's $100 you can save that can go straight to new gear, software, accessories, whatever you want for your production setup. Don't wait. This offer won't be around for long. Once again, claim your exclusive offer now at videomaker.com/2020plus. Okay, and we're back. So we're going through this list of tips. The list is 20 long, and so we only have 18 more to go, guys.
Yeah, we've got through 3.
Okay, so obviously we're not going to get through all of them, so I'm going to skip through to like something that maybe one of the more interesting ones, which I'm actually curious to learn about from a photography perspective, which is where was it? Boy, I lost it. Learn the basics of post-processing. So we do this a little bit with video, but I don't know. Raymond, what are your thoughts on how important post-processing is for the world of photography?
For the world of photography, there's really two different. I take that back. There's always a million different ways to go about it, but it really depends on the type of photography that it is that you shoot. If you're the kind of person who wants to do high fashion, you want to do editorial, then post-production is going to be very important. Same with commercial work, product photography, all these things. It's going to be very, very important for you to learn how to work Photoshop, how to work all these fancy tools, which is unfortunate because I think that a lot of us get in, well, I guess it depends. As far as me, I kind of got into this world of video and photography because that was the creative outlet for me. And seeing that finished product with the least amount of resistance, I got to add that in there, with the least amount of resistance was what was most exciting to me. So even if it didn't look perfect, even if there were some, I don't want to say technical glitches, but there was a little bit more leeway in the stuff that I created because at the end of the day, something got done and the story was still there. Whereas with photography, you don't have that option with products. You don't have that option with editorial work. But I am primarily a wedding photographer, and I know that many people would think, well, weddings have to be retouched. They have to be picture perfect. They gotta. I don't know if, everybody listening has been to a wedding, but it is chaos. There's people everywhere. Timelines are always late. Somebody forgot to wear a bouquet or, you don't know where the rings are. Something like that is always chaos. And I've always kind of taken the approach that making that look perfect is, disingenuous. It doesn't make any sense to me. the way that I photograph a wedding is I want you to be able to look back at these photos a decade from now or 5 decades from now and think to yourself, this is exactly what we look like. And this is the authentic feel of our wedding day. And a lot of that comes into, essentially vetting which couples are going to be the best for me. And the way that I shoot. But honestly, I don't want editing for me to be anything more than a signature. I don't want that to be what creates, like what you were saying, Chris, with the Billie Eilish shoot there. A lot of that work came into the edit. And while that's cool, that's not my style. And it really does just come down to the style of what it is that you like and how it is that you want to shoot and what it is that you want to create. So therefore, while I do think that it's important to learn editing, I don't think that it's paramount. And we know this because there's plenty of photographers who still shoot film. And all that they're doing is just minor pushes, or maybe they're pulling their film a little bit and they're just kind of adjusting the exposure. They're not adjusting too much colors. They're not doing too much dodging and burning. They're trying to get it right in camera, and then that's going to be it. And that's always the approach that I took. Is when I went to film school, I was still shooting on film, and it almost came out of necessity because I didn't have any money to do anything more than a one light in the telecine. Like I didn't have the money to go in for a full grade. So I learned as much as I could about the technical aspect of shooting and how the decisions that I made on set can change the film and how it looks, so that I can get the best product is in camera. So that when we got it back, it was ready to make just minor tweaks and get ready to go. So for those who are worried about editing, who think that it is this big monster right in the room, I don't think that you have to worry about it too much. I don't think that it's something that you have to spend too much of your time on. If capturing the image is what it is that you love to do, get better at that. Just focus on that. And if you need to, do some editing, maybe outsource it or, whatever. But I kind of have a rare take, I suppose, on the importance of editing with that. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts, though, because video is an entirely different thing. And one of the reasons why I like photography way more than video, because I spent so many hours in high school editing my videos that I'm done for the rest of my life. It's so much work. You try to edit 2 frames together and you're like, this does not work, or I've crossed the line, or, something to the effect. And these are now things that I just don't have to worry about in photography, luckily.
I think the interesting thing in the film and video world is that not everybody's into holding cameras or doing the camera work. So there is, if you're a DP, you don't worry about your editing. You don't have to do it. Maybe you have a colorist that you really trust and so you can communicate well with them. I think that's real important for you to know the process, but you don't necessarily need to have mastered it. But what I do think that sometimes working in doing any kind of editing, be it video or photo, is that it's going to help you realize how much work it takes to correct that thing you could have done just right in camera. And I think that the idea of I spent 8 hours trying to correct this thing. If I would have just spent 20 minutes when I was shooting it to make it right, it would have looked probably better as the final outcome, as well as the process not taking as long. I've actually been converting more that way, because you can shoot raw video now and just the sensor data. So you're gonna have to bring in all the contrast. You're gonna have to bring in the saturation, and you have all those choices, and that's great. And you might have all sorts of longitude and be able to change those things. But if you don't have an end goal, that's kind of, that's overwhelming, right? How am I going to grade this to make it look the way I want it to? It's it takes a bigger view. Though I think that getting in partnerships with this kind of work sometimes is really nice, because I know that, I love shooting, but really I probably would be happy if I was editing all day, every day. And with that, find those people that like that, because there's other people that want to shoot every day. And all of a sudden you have this beautiful, happy marriage. Someone likes to sit in a dark room. The other person likes to work a room. And I think those things work really well together. But to communicate those back and forth and make that relationship work, I think it means you got to speak the same language. But that I think that you want to, if you have someone you're working with, debrief with them after a project and go, hey, how could I have shot this stuff so you had less headache, so you can learn those things without actually having to do the School of Hard Knocks. But as far as editing, there's so much of that story. What was it? What was his name? Papa, the YouTuber. Anyway, he was a really well-versed editor, and he always was like, yeah, I take the script and then I just do what I want. And I like adore that idea that you have the trust of the people that you're working with enough that like they're excited about what you will come up with to take it to the next level. And I like that as well, because you don't have to necessarily have thought of the best edit if you are, say, a director, a writer, a DP, all the shooting side or all the production side of it is the post. If you have someone that you trust, that that can take it to that next level outside of your own thought, is really exciting. And that's when you get that high level of, if you get to work with the people you want to work with, make sure they do it the way you like it, and that you all, are happy doing it. But film is so much harder, because I would love it if I was done when I was done shooting. And I've done some gigs where like, I just got paid to shoot all day, and like, I'll give me that money all the time. If I don't have to do anything with this, cool. All my mistakes will be someone else to deal with. I don't have to worry about it. But when you're shooting for your own edit, it's like self-preservation the whole time. Is like, I got to make sure this is good enough so that I can cash the check that I'm writing about with the project itself. Did an interview with a photographer that was in Chicago, and he was a husband and wife, and he did all the was the photographer, and she was the touch-up. She was all post. And he didn't know crap about Photoshop, didn't know anything, but has just really high end retouching and coloring and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, because his wife does just that, and does it to just a level that he goes, oh yeah, I always shoot a stop down because she likes to, she likes to make sure the highlights are still there or whatever it is. And so it was like, their relationship made it happen. And like, it'd be great if it was just, you had a built-in colorist for any of your work. That'd be great. But I don't find, I'm a generalist. I shoot, I edit, I write, I do all the parts. But that I think most people, when you push them, like, which one's your favorite? Could you do it all the time? They're going to choose a shooting or editing, or maybe I guess you could find all the different assets. It could be good lighting, it could be set design or whatever. But that usually it ends up being, if like for you love the shooting, I think finding the right clients to accept that. I remember when I was making commercials, like I remember one client really wanted the like washed out look, the real flat look. And that wasn't really the look that I was creating at the time. And they wanted it so bad that we realized at the end of the project, it was like, you aren't going to be happy with anything but people that make this kind of content, or that makes that shoot it this way. And that's just not my style. And it wasn't that they weren't happy with the product. It was that our styles didn't mix, and that it just ended up being like I guess someone else will make that ad. That was a different experience. It was more real high expectations from people that are paying, small amount of money for an ad. That can be a problem there too. But, the making sure that the client is on the same page as you as far as stylistically, regardless if you're shooting film or video, I think that's really key, because I think everybody has a style, or at least you fall into a style. If you don't have one that's specifically yours, or one that you've created, there's still a style of which you appreciate or you aspire for. And I think sometimes those styles don't mix with others. Like people that really like really strong contrast and dramatic lighting aren't going to work well for that comedy unless it's a dark comedy. It's not going to work good for the news because they don't work that way. So I think sometimes it's just about that happy connection of client and photographer or videographer.
That episode you were thinking of, Chris, Sven Pape.
Oh, Sven Papas.
I think it was Pape.
Was it Pape?
Yeah. Episode number 38, if anyone wants to go back. 36, sorry.
36. We had really great insight on editing. It's great talking to a guy that just does editing, because in this world, that's the people that are getting the work, right?
Yeah. So, I think that, post-processing, you should understand it the way that you should understand, any phase of production for photography or video, right? So using the camera and snapping a picture or hitting record or setting up lights is a third of the process, right? There's pre-production, there's writing words, there's planning, which is also, you should understand that process. And there's what you do afterwards in the edit bay, whether you're manipulating the color of an image or, erasing elements or adding elements or piecing together clips. You should understand that as an essential part of creating images or creating stories. But it's interesting, Raymond, the thing that you pointed out that you like to avoid is for me is the side that I like to embrace, which is, it sounded like what you're describing is almost like a photojournalism philosophy where you're documenting an event or something, and it's like you're preserving this thing. And this is, when you're talking about wedding photography, you capture this, and it's a sort of a representation of what happened in terms of, maybe you captured a little bit of the chaos that was there or what have you.
All the chaos.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. My philosophy is with any image capture, whether it's a photograph or a film or whatever, it is never a perfect, example of what was actually happening. Even if you take the most basic form of documentary, which is just like camera recording with no edits. Mm-hmm. In all cases, you can take the police body cam as an example. You can look at that footage and that there is more to this than can be displayed in this image or this video. And so from my perspective, at least as a hobbyist or an enthusiast, I like to embrace that fantasy that what you're seeing is not real. No matter how real it seems or no matter how close to reality it is, it's not real. And so I like to take that and play with it in the sense that if it's a photograph, I want the photograph to be closer to what my memory of the event was than what it actually was. There's an example here. My wife and I went on a vacation near a lake, and I took a picture of her next to this lake, and I have a memory of this moment. And then, a month later, I bring up the picture, and I'm like, well, this is close, but I don't remember like all those buoys on the water, and this is, person falling off of their water skis in the background. So I'm taking the picture, I'm adjusting the color, I'm erasing that stuff. Now it's a pristine lake with maybe like a a lone sailboat in the background. I'm like, okay, now this is the thing. This is close to my memory, and this is what I want to print and hang on the wall. And similarly with video, it's the same kind of thing where I want to portray these visuals the way that sort of accentuates what you should feel when you're watching it rather than what was it really like when it was shot. Now, that doesn't mean I don't sort of respect the other position. Obviously, the work that photojournalists do and documentarians do to do their best to actually communicate the truth of what happened is very, very important. I appreciate it very much. But for me, I enjoy the process of manipulating reality, essentially.
Well, and I think that a client could hire someone to do that, right? I have a friend that his wedding was every single image they made into a fantasy image. There was like, the background was always purple and all the colors were super saturated, and they tried to make every single scene seem like it was out of a fairy book or a fairy tale book or something. And I mean, for me, not my taste, but there was, I'm thinking hours on every still image to make them all that way. But they probably paid for that. They probably only got 50 images where you might get 500 if it was just the event. So, I think it really just make sure you're matched up with the right client. Because obviously you hire me to do that, it's not going to turn out as good because I don't believe in it. It's not my style. It's not the thing that I feel or I have a mind's eye to capture.
Well, that's why it's harder, I think, when shooting video and working with clients than it is for photography. Because as a photographer, at least for me as an event shooter for weddings and engagements, I have my style and I stick to it. That's what it is. You look at it, that's what it is. Yeah. But when it comes to video and people who are uneducated on the process, companies, they don't know if they like a video because of the edit. They don't know if they like a video because of the grading. They don't know if they like a video because of the framing and the depth of field and all these, effects or anything. And as videographers, you have to be able to adjust to that, because if you're making we'll just use the commercial example. If you're making a commercial for a bank, it's probably going to be different than a car lot or a burrito shop or something like that, maybe something that has a younger demographic, and you have to think about those things. Whereas with photography, this is what I do. You can look at it, you can see it. And if you like it, then we're going to be good. But if you don't, well, this is what I offer. And that's the end. So that's where that flexibility as a videographer is a lot harder for me to handle. And I'm glad that there's people in the world like you who do this and not me.
I always, when we were making commercials, we always sometimes have to make them into radio ads. And I always was thinking, man, the people that have to make radio ads, they have it down. Like, man, they do my first 10% of my work here is their job done. And, the same thing with, a still image that I take, 24, I might take 60 or 120 of those a second. And I got to deal with, an hour's worth of them. So it's like, the idea of like retouching video is a whole different ball of wax than retouching a still image where you can, I can get rid of that, the kayaker in the back or whatever, no problem. But it's like, I got to do that for the next 100, or 300 frames. And then it needs to look right from frame to frame and all the rest. There is so much to be done there. Whereas that might be a better choice to just go, hey, can I frame this so that I don't see that dude? Or whatever it is, if you're trying to capture that. I love the idea though of, I think images are romanced over time because every time we think of a memory, we write over that last memory, the real memory of it or the last time we thought of it. And, because of that, we tend to drift a little bit in our remembrance of moments and stuff like that. For my wedding, I didn't hire a videographer because I felt like video might actually feel more like the actual moment. It's like, I want time to make that better. Mm-hmm. I want, I want to look at those images and remember the moment, but, but that was, like I wanted my portraits, but then I wanted someone just to take pictures of the event and to have a story of that. And I think just everybody has a different thing, but let's move on to another topic.
I don't think there's any more topics to discuss.
Oh, really?
We're at our end time here.
Oh, well, man.
Alrighty. So we got 17 more topics to do for next time.
No, number 19 is have fun.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah. So we don't have to talk about that one.
That's a great one.
Just have fun.
Yeah. Okay, Raymond. Well, thanks so much for giving us some time today.
Of course. Yeah, I had a blast chatting with you guys. This was a ton of fun. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks everyone for listening. We'll catch you next time. Big thanks to Raymond Hatfield for joining us. You can check out his podcast, the Beginner Photography Podcast, wherever you can find podcasts. So just Google it or go to iTunes and search for the Beginner Photography Podcast and it'll come right up. So for Chris Monlux and everyone here at Videomaker, I'm Mike Wilhelm, and you've been listening to the Videomaker Podcast. We'll catch you next time.